Welcome everybody. I'm going to start off a little bit different than most presenters start off. We're going to start off with a video. In my years of teaching, which I was a high school teacher, middle school teacher for about 7 years, I noticed that with adolescents, it's very hard for them to sit still for more than 45 minutes. And I've also noticed with adults, even professionals, that it's very similar to sit still for 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And we've been sitting together for the past 3 hours. And so I figured let's start with a little bit of a video. Um, and it's a 2 minute video. It's the end of a clip that I show in one of my classes that I teach here at Utah State. And then I'll kind of introduce what I'll be talking about and I'll introduce myself a little bit. So let's go ahead and I will share my screen and we'll watch this little video. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah? Okay. All right. Here we go.
Do. We say, "Hi, I'm a social
Can we hear or do I need to? Okay.
worker. What's your superpower?"
Eric, when you muted, the audio stopped.
With
Well, then I will unmute myself.
my favorite strength story comes back, who was a social worker who lived on the coast, and every year she would take a social work intern. Well, one year she had a young woman. She assigned him to a client named, I'll call him Bob. Well, Bob struggled with a severe mental illness, and Bob isolated himself in his apartment, and all he would do all day obsessively was listen to the radio. So Martha sends the student to do an assessment. The student comes back. Martha says, "So what'd you learn?" And the student says, "I learned he is really good at listening to the radio." But she had a plan. She went to the local Coast Guard office where apparently there is somebody who has to listen to the shortwave radio all day long and write down the announcements in the news in a log. And she convinced them to let Bob volunteer. Then she convinced Bob to try it. And really, Bob, they want you to listen to the radio. Well, he did. And he listened to the radio better than anybody had ever listened to the radio. They loved him. They hired him part-time. So then Bob said, "Okay, I have a little bit of money. I'm getting out of the house a little bit. I'd like to try eating out. I haven't done that in years, but I'm scared to do it alone. Would you meet me at the local diner?" So the student says, "Yeah." And the next day she gets there, but she gets there early and she sits on the far side of the diner so that when Bob comes in, she hollers across the diner, "Bob, what'd you hear on the radio?" Bob hollers back all the news. Well, they do this a couple of times a week for several weeks till every local in the diner knows that if you want to know what's going on, you ask Bob. And Martha swears that by the end, it was like that scene in Cheers when Norm walks in. It was like, "Bob." So Bob has a job and money and friends. And it all happened because the social worker tapped into his superpower of radio listening. So my final thought for you today is this. As I've said before, everyone at some point is going to need a social worker. When that happens to you, don't worry, don't be embarrassed, go find one. I promise you, they will be a superhero. And better yet, they will help you find your superpower so that you can work through whatever life is throwing your way. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, to start out, thank you all for being superheroes. Thank you all for having your superpowers and influencing your communities, influencing the clients that you work with, being the amazing therapists or caseworkers or whatever it is that you do in your professional setting. Thank you so much for being amazing social workers and for continuing this work and to continue this work forward. I think it's such an important time, especially, in our crazy world that we live in, um, to continue to grow not only as professionals but as community members as well. And I think that we need to continue to do that. So now let's go ahead and get going. So let me share and start the good old presentation. I don't know why. Uh-oh. Sorry, we have some technical difficulties here. Let's see. Okay. Can everybody see it? Yeah, we're good. Okay, I don't know what's going on with the transcribing, but we'll leave it on there if that's okay with everybody. Um, so my name's Eric Hansen. I am a clinical assistant professor at Utah State University on the Eastern Campus. I get to work alongside Dr. Spears, who did an amazing job today with Paula. Thank you for that. I teach in the bachelor's program, and I will be teaching in the master's program as well in the summer. And I've been employed by Utah State University since 2023. Uh, Before this, I was a high school and middle school teacher at a local high school here in Price called Pinnacle Canyon Academy, and some of them are here. It's an amazing school, and I'll actually talk a little bit about them today as well. If you have any questions, feel free to ask at any time. I don't know if I can see. Is there a way that I can see the chat while I'm in presenter view? Aaron? I don't know.
I think you have to have it on a separate screen, but if you'd like, I can monitor the chat for you.
Okay, if you could do that, because I don't have a separate screen. I only have the one monitor. Um, so first of all, I want to start out by saying that I don't take this opportunity lightly to talk about suicide prevention, especially advancing clinical practice in suicide prevention, because this topic is not only professional for me, but it's also very personal. Um, Over the past year, suicide has been a big part and has impacted my family and the community in which I live in a lot over the past year. And when something like this happens within your family, within your community, it really it rocks the community, it rocks the family. It really changes how you see work. It changes how you see your personal life. It changes how you see your professional life. It makes you question if you're doing things correctly. It makes you question if what's going on in this world and how can we make it better. It also changes how you hear people. It changes how you sit with somebody when they say, I'm not okay. It changes the way that you look at individuals' lives and kind of pick up on the things that are going on in their life that they may be struggling with. And it really does, it forces you to ask a much harder question. Not do I know what to do, but will I recognize the moment when it matters most? How can I help when I recognize? Okay. So I also know that suicide prevention is something that we hear about often in these conferences and trainings, in different continuing education opportunities. And so my my goal is not to give you the same information, even though some of it will be very similar to what you've already heard, because a lot of you have been in this profession very much longer than I have, and I appreciate that. And so please chime in at any point if you have something that you would like to ask, if you'd like to add anything. There will be one point where I will ask people to give some feedback a little bit, but you all know the data. You all know the models, you all know the protocols. You're all professionals in this aspect. And that's why today I don't really want to repeat all of this because you already know most of it. So, really, today's about something a little bit different, and it's about slowing down. It's about slowing this down and taking a real honest look at how this actually shows up in our work as clinicians or as case managers or as educators, to take a look at how it really does show up in our daily lives. It's about the moments that aren't necessarily crisis moments. Um, it's about those clients that don't really raise the red flags, that seem to be okay and they are doing okay and they tell you that they're doing okay. It's about the decisions that we're going to be able to make in real time. Because at the end of the day, this work really isn't defined by what we know. It's defined by what we do. Okay, this work is defined by what we do, and it's defined by what we do in those moments that are most important. So I'm going to start off by telling a little bit of a story about an incident that happened to me back in 2000. I think it was 2017. I was a teacher and a coach, and I was coaching. So I was teaching Spanish and Portuguese at the high school at Pinnacle Canyon Academy, and I was at the time I was coaching baseball. And we had practice that evening, and everything went really well. Nothing really had happened. Um, great opportunity for the young student athletes to come and talk to me. We had a great practice. Went home, ate dinner, talked to my family, did a little bit of grading, and then I went to bed. And sometime in the middle of the night, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I say 3 a.m. just because it's 3 a.m. sounds like a good time in the middle of the in the morning. Um, I I got a phone call, and for some reason that night I decided to leave my phone on loud instead of putting it on silent. And so I got a phone call, and I looked down, and it was one of the student athletes that I taught and I coached. And he got on the phone, and we're going to call him Bob for this. It's not his real name, obviously, but for confidentiality reasons. Um, I answered the phone. I said, "Hey, what's up?" And he said, "Coach, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I don't want to live. I have a gun, and I'm going to pull the trigger." And in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was a teacher. I didn't have the clinical training that I have now. And so I kind of talked to him for a minute, and I said, "Hey, just let me come pick you up and we'll figure this out." And at the same time, I'm texting our social worker at the school who's here actually. She's amazing. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. And she's telling me, bring him in. Luckily, she woke up and she said, "Bring him in, bring him to the school. We'll talk to him." In that moment, nothing really else mattered. Looking back on it, it didn't matter about theory. It didn't matter about what I knew. It really mattered. What really mattered was, what do I do now? What do I do in this moment? So everything that we're going to talk about today is going to kind of come back to this story, and we're going to connect it back to this moment of what do I do, and how, not only what do I do, but how do I do it? So the learning objectives for today that we're going to focus on are things that I want to frame just a little bit differently than normal. So as we go through this presentation, and as I talk for the next 30, 40 minutes, um, I don't want you to think about, do I know this? Because odds are is yes, you do know this. You've heard this before, you've heard this multiple times. But what I want you to think about is do I do this? Do I do this consistently? Do I continuously ask these questions? Do I continuously screen individuals for suicidal ideation? Because at 3 a.m., or because in those moments that you're not expecting it, knowledge doesn't really save lives. It's that application of knowledge that is going to save a life. Because we can be the smartest people in the world, but if we don't know how to apply those things, we have a very difficult time in helping someone. We're going to talk about updated standards, the NASW Code of Ethics with 2026. We're gonna talk about implementing screening protocols, specifically the CSSRS, the ASQ, and the PHQ-9. We'll talk about those a little bit later on, and then we're going to talk about safety interventions or safety planning, means reduction, and then follow up as well. So what does this really mean for practice? All of this that I kind of have mentioned, and the learning objectives. It means, who do we screen and when? I think that's a very important question. Who is it that we screen and when? Because I don't know about all of you, but for the time that I've been doing this, the individuals that I have screened for suicidal ideation, which prior to this year was not very much, to be honest with you, because I felt like everybody was doing well. But since things have happened in my own life and in my community, I've been doing this a lot more. But who do we screen, and when do we screen them? We're going to talk about how we assess risks. Dynamic versus static, meaning dynamic in the sense of, this is the protocol, this is what we have to do, and this is when we do it. Okay. Versus static, which is always changing, because risks always change, and assessing risk is always going to change as well. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about what we need to stop doing. We're going to talk about what we need to start doing. Okay. Because Bob, to be honest with you, that day, Bob he wasn't a crisis. It wasn't a crisis until it was a crisis. He was functioning. He went to school that day. He was getting good grades. He was playing baseball. He had a great practice. He was one of our leaders on the team. And that's really the problem. What we think risk looks like. because risk looks different for everybody. And it's very different. Oftentimes, it's very, very different. So, we've all seen these statistics. I got these statistics from the World Health Organization. Last year alone, there was over 720,000 deaths by suicide. The fourth leading cause between ages 15 to 29. And it talked about how the attempts are a lot more than the actual deaths. So there's 20 attempts to 1 death by suicide. So I want you to think about that. 720,000 deaths and 20 to 1 ratio of attempts to death. So how many attempts is that? I'm not a mathematician. There's a reason that I didn't go to school to be a mathematician, because I really hate numbers, to be honest with you. But how many attempts would that be if there's 720,000 deaths and there's 20 attempts? Can anybody just shout out a number? A lot, millions, I don't know. There, I yelled out the answers. Oh, hey, I can see the chat now. That's weird. 14.4 million. I like that. Okay. A lot, right? There's a lot. And it's a lot. I mean, I don't think there's really much more that needs to be said about that. I was reading a study recently that said just in these first 3 months in the world, there's been over 95,000 deaths. And that's crazy. That's crazy to me that there is that much going on. Okay. The thing about it is a lot of these people, they were in systems. They were being seen by therapists. They were receiving mental health services. They had contact with the professionals. Bob wasn't outside the system. He had opportunities to talk with school social workers. He had opportunities to talk with professionals. And he was right in front of us. He was right in front of us, and we didn't even know. I mean, yeah, we knew that there was some stuff going on at home that was rough. He was being raised by his grandparents, but we didn't know the extent of his sadness. We didn't know the extent of his mental health. So it's not just necessarily a public health issue. It's actually a clinical issue as well. Yes, it's a public health issue, but it's clinical as well. Oh, there we go. So the updated standards of care from the NASW Code of Ethics 2026. So the standards are becoming more direct, which I think is good, because for a really long time they've just been, hey, this is what you need to do. If you feel like you need to do it, you should do it. Whereas the direct suicide assessment is required now. Okay. We're expected to assess suicide risk directly. We're not necessarily expected to wait for cues. We don't assume. Okay. Looking back on this experience with Bob, I didn't really directly assess him, because obviously I didn't have the tools back then that I have now, but it didn't look like anything was wrong. He didn't look like he was out of place. He didn't look like anything was going on within his mind. It wasn't because I didn't care. It's because nothing told me that I really needed to do that. Okay. And that's really where the gap is between these updated standards and the standards that we used to have, that these updated standards are trying to address, that we need to be more direct. Okay. We need to routinely screen individuals. Over the past year, I have actually started to screen individuals that even mention something about being sad or being low or being depressed. I will do a screening right then and there. And a lot of my clients, they understand that I'm going to do that. But we need to understand that we need to do these screenings. And we'll talk about those screenings here in a minute. Follow-up responsibility, I think that's a big one. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a couple of slides, where it talks about how we need to follow up and how often we need to follow up with these individuals who we do screen and who do have suicidal ideation. So research shows that clinicians can miss up to 50% of suicidal ideation without structured tools. 50% is a pretty big number. That's half of individuals who have suicidal ideation that we're missing because we are not using correct screening tools. It's not because we're not skilled. It's not because we don't know what we're doing. It's not because, we're not intelligent enough to see the signs and the cues. Really what it is it's because the ideation is hidden. I don't know about all of you, but individuals are very, very good at hiding their emotions. They're very, very good at hiding their feelings. They are very, very good at hiding everything that tells us that they are struggling. Okay? Bob didn't come into my classroom and say, "Hey, coach, I'm suicidal." He functioned. He showed up. He was always on time to class. He was always on time to practice. He was always on time to everything. He was doing well. He had a significant other. He was happy. He was the light of the party. Um, so I didn't ask. I didn't ask if he was doing okay because, to be honest with you, I thought he was doing okay. And that right there is the reality of failure when it comes to screening is sometimes we rely on ourselves and we rely on our training, which is great. And I'm not saying that we don't need to rely on ourselves, but sometimes we rely so much on our gut feeling that we fail to ask the right questions. So the screening tools that we're going to talk about today, these are some of the tools that the NASW wants us to use, and I agree with them because they're amazing. We all know what the CSSRS is. It's the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. If you haven't used it yet, I'm sure that you will use it. It's something that we learn in class when we're getting our master's degree, and it's something that we practice in school as well. Okay. Then there's the ASQ, which is the Ask Suicide Screening Questions, and it's a set of four questions that are very direct. And so I'm going to read these questions in case you didn't know what they were. So, in the past few weeks, have you wished you were dead? Question number 2, in the past few weeks, have you felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Question number 3, in the past week, have you been having thoughts about killing yourself? And question number 4, have you ever tried to kill yourself? And then if any of those answers are yes, you ask a follow-up question. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself right now? I mean, it's 4 to 5 questions that are very direct, and it gives us the information that we will need. It gives us the information that the individual maybe wants to tell us but doesn't know how to tell us. But also asking those questions, and if you know your clients well enough, you'll be able to tell, if they're struggling to answer those or if they're saying yes, but in reality, your gut's saying no. And I know I said don't rely on your gut, but in this situation, we're using the screening tool and we can tell based off of their reaction, their physical reaction, based off of their answers. That's where our training can come in and tell us, hey, this individual is struggling. Okay. So I want to do something really fast. I want to try this for a second. If a client says, "I've been really overwhelmed lately," what is the next question? Go ahead and put it in the chat. When a client says, "I've been really overwhelmed lately," what do you think the next question should be? Tell me more. Tell me about that. What does that look like? Tell me more. Share with me. How have you been taking care of yourself? What does that feel like? Can you tell me what's on your mind? How so? Awesome. These are all great. These are all great. Because in reality, when somebody tells us that they're overwhelmed, we should ask the question, well, what's going on? How can we help? You came in today, let's talk. Now I want you to compare that to, hey, what's going on? And they tell you what's going on, and then they say to you, I've been overwhelmed because this and this and this is going on, and I'm feeling very, very low, and I'm feeling like there's no way out. Okay. Ashley put in here, overwhelmed can mean so many things, and I agree with that 100%. So what does that overwhelming feeling feel like? As you talk to them and as they tell you what's going on, you'll be able to judge what it is that's going on in their life. And then you can ask those questions. For example, hey, have you had any thoughts of harming yourself? I understand that this is really, really hard for you right now. And, over the last little while since this has been happening, have you been thinking of self-harm, or have you been engaging in self-harm? Okay. That's the difference between conversation and assessment. Conversations can really be assessments. and assessments can be conversations. Having those conversations and asking those questions are going to help us identify the need or identify the risk that is going on in those individuals' lives. Okay, so after the ASQ, we have the PHQ-9. Now, the PHQ-9, it's a validated screening tool for depression. And a lot of times, primary care physicians, mental health agencies, and school settings, they use the PHQ-9. When I worked in public mental health, we used the PHQ-9 almost on a daily basis. Here at the university, we also use the PHQ-9 as well. At intake and then throughout sessions, we'll use the PHQ-9. And really what it is it's 9 questions that ask certain questions about depression, okay? And it takes it straight from the DSM, and the DSM criteria for depression, and then it rates them on a scale. It does the rating for you. It tells you, okay, they're high risk, low risk, medium risk. And it gives you an idea. Yeah, it's not necessarily about suicide or suicidal ideation, but it is very much so a depression screening tool that can help with that. Okay. And these screening tools, they're not necessarily new. Okay, they've been around for a really long time, but what is new is how we can start using them. If you aren't using them yet, I can guarantee that most of you are using these tools, but what's new is how we're using them and when we're using them. Okay, screening should not depend on the clinician intuition. It should depend on the client. It should depend on what they're saying to you. It should depend on how they are reacting to certain situations. Because if we only ask when we feel concerned, we're going to miss people. Okay. We missed Bob. We didn't know that he was struggling. We didn't understand that he had those struggles going on in his life. So I'm going to ask a reflective question. Think about the last couple clients that you've worked with, whether it was today, whether it was last week, and I want you to think to yourself, who did you not ask? Okay, who did you not ask? I actually had a client that I met with this morning that has been struggling with depression, has been struggling with not feeling positive about themselves, and so as the conversation went on, they made a comment to me about how they had felt really low this last week. So I let them finish talking, and then I asked them, I understand, you said that you've been feeling low, and so I want to ask you, during this week, did you have any thoughts of harming yourself? Did you have any thoughts of ending your own life? And they kind of looked at me, and it took them by surprise for a minute, and they said, well, no, actually. Nothing that was out of the ordinary, nothing that I have not felt since I was a kid. And I was like, interesting. So we talked a little bit more, and I was able to screen this individual a little bit more. And we didn't need to safety plan, but they understood that I was going to ask them that question. Okay. So, oh, I got to push the button. Risk is not static. This is an important slide, okay? As clinicians, we've learned and we've been trained and we've read books and all these other things that we need to categorize risk as low, medium, and high, which it's great because we need to know those things. We need to know who's low, we need to know who's medium, we need to know who's high. But in reality, risk is really like the weather here in Utah. It changes. At one moment, it can be snowing and it can be super cold. And the next moment, it can be, right now, I'm in Price and it's 82 degrees outside and sunny. And we're in March. And so risk is like the Utah weather. It can change at the drop of a hat. Okay, it changes quickly. Earlier that day, Bob was doing really well. Bob was having fun at practice. Bob was happy. Bob was joking. But at 3 a.m., he had a gun. And at 3 a.m., he was wanting to end his life. So that's how fast it can shift. Okay. We understand that low risk it means thoughts, but no intent. Medium risk means that there's ideation there and there's some intent. And then high risk is there's a plan and access to that plan. Okay. But somebody that comes into your office and is low risk at that moment could potentially be high risk an hour later after they leave you. Okay. I like this quote that says risk changes faster than documentation. Okay. I don't know about all of you, but sometimes I'll have a full day of therapy and I won't be able to do my documentation until the end of the day. And so my client that I saw at 8 a.m., I haven't been able to do that documentation until noon during my lunch break. Within those 4 hours, the risk level can go from low to high within those 4 hours. And so we need to be vigilant in understanding that and also understand that, you know, we need to ask questions. We need to have those hard conversations with clients. No harm contracts. Studies show that no harm contracts don't really do much. Okay, they're outdated. They don't prevent suicide, and they don't provide clinical protection as well, which is important for us. Okay, we need to have clinical protection as well. I'm just going to I saw somebody posted something. Yeah, hopelessness is one of the strongest psychological predictors of suicide risk. I like the PHQ-9 aspect specifically. I like that. I like that, Kyler. And Ashley, I'm sorry to hear that. That's a good question. What did we miss? It's what we didn't know. Okay, so what is it that we missed? Is there anything that we can say to that? I don't think we can honestly say that we know what was missed and what we didn't know. Okay. I mean, there's so many different things. We had a recent one here in our community as well. Okay. It was a 15-year-old boy at our high school, at our local high school this last week. And it has shaken that community. And the social workers at the school are they're working very diligently with the teachers, with the students, with the faculty and everybody within the community. And that is the biggest question is, what did we miss? What did we miss? And so hopefully through this, we can understand we need to ask more questions. We need to ask more. Okay. I agree, Jen. One of the hardest things with suicide is the mystery around it that inevitably goes unsolved, 100%. Okay. We've all been affected by suicide in one way or another. Whether it's somebody that we've known, whether it's a client that we've worked with. And hopefully today we learn more skills. Hopefully today we understand a little bit more that, although those conversations might be intimidating, they're kind of necessary, especially with clients. Not only clients, but people in general. Okay. So, no harm contracts don't really work. They don't prevent suicide. They also don't provide clinical protection. They really can increase liability. Okay, so a contract relies on commitment in a moment of stability. In that moment that you make that contract with them, they're stable, right? They're stable. They're feeling good. They think that everything's going to go well, and then all of a sudden they leave and something happens, and that contract is not important anymore. Okay, suicidal behavior happens in moments of instability. Okay, it happens when we least expect it. It happens after they've had a session. It happens at times where we don't understand. Okay, so if Bob had signed some sort of no harm contract that week, it really wouldn't have mattered at 3 a.m. when he was going through what he was going through. It wouldn't have mattered what was happening, because what was happening was enough to make him feel the way that he was feeling in that moment. Okay, so what really matters when it comes to preventing suicide or suicide prevention is safety planning. Collaborative safety planning. Okay, what matters is what they can actually do in that moment. The skills, the tools, and the things that they can do in that moment to help them work through those emotions and work through that thought process of there's nothing that I can do and I need to end it. Okay. So this is where I kind of want to open it up. Open it up to the chat. Also open it up if somebody wants to say something. Oh, I went the wrong way. To say something. But I'd like to open it up and hear from the professionals in the room because you're all professionals. What are some safety planning tools or some safety plans that you use when you have screened somebody and they are medium risk to high risk and you feel like you have to do some sort of safety planning? What are some tools that you use in your clinical practice that help them? CAMS, okay. Do a coping plan. Awesome. Does anybody want to hop on and say something? Identify protective factors. Index card with resources, people to talk to, things they're looking forward to.
Eric, I think one thing, sorry,
Go ahead.
typing a bunch and I'm just gonna stop that. So I think it's important to note, some of the comments are around people expressing like hopelessness and that despondency, and making sure that we create that space where they do that, that we're not like overreacting, that we're responding appropriately and having those meaningful conversations so that we can assess, is this someone explaining that they don't see a way out of this besides death and wanting to feel they have that autonomy? And we don't say, yes, that's a great idea, right? I'm not suggesting that, but being able to talk about it and talk about those feelings, those deep, painful feelings. And so, yeah, I think we always have to balance the response and not be like too alarmist while still taking it so seriously, right? Without alienating them and making them feel like I can't talk to them about this because they freak out.
Yes. I 100% agree.
I've found that if like the collaborative, I start right with like their accountability in it, the safety planning. As someone who struggled with this a lot as a teenager, I found that like if someone would have included me in it, like, hey, you are an advocate for you too.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just an advocate for your life. You are your advocate. You are your first advocate. And that has changed a lot with bringing them in on that in that way. I have yet to have like people who are suicidal for me typically will call me, hey, Shanna, I'm not safe. I'm headed to the hospital. Okay. And that's about the conversation we have now.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
I take crisis calls for my job. I talk to people who have very active suicidal ideation all day, every day. And something we focus on is that suicidal thoughts are often something that happens when there's just not a straightforward solution, that our brains want to have a solution. And when we don't have a solution, our brains will make a solution. And sometimes that's the only thing our brains can come up with. So just kind of trying to let them know that they're not crazy or stupid, that they're in a really intense situation or they're having some really intense emotions, in that it's their brain's way of trying to find some solutions for what they're dealing with. And that we do safety planning to help their brain with having solutions when they feel really overwhelmed or when they don't have good options, as like something that they can print out or write down so that when their brain's overwhelmed, they have something that says, okay, here are some alternate solutions. And then we make it really specific to them. We talk about like the things that are good distractions for them or the people that they can talk to, and also like means reduction, making sure that they're taking steps now while their brain is able to think of things and think of solutions, that they're taking steps now to reduce access to means, to make their environment more safe, so that when they're in that headspace, it's harder for them to do something impulsive. I think those are the main things that I try really hard to touch on, that kind of that normalizing piece that they're not crazy, they just need some support, and this is their brain's way of telling them they need some support, and then making sure they have those distractions, making sure they have supports, and making sure they're taking steps now to help them be safe in the future.
Awesome. Aaron, it sounds like Courtney is really wanting to do the next round of TCI um, about.
I had the same thought.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Courtney, send your email to Aaron so you can present next time. That was awesome. Yeah, I mean, all of these are great ideas. All of these are amazing ideas. Okay. And that's why I wanted to open it up to the group because you're all professionals. You've all been doing this for many, many years. And we understand that, a prevention plan or a safety plan or whatever we want to call it, it's so important. And there's a lot of things going on in the chat that says, yeah, those safety plans are important, but the follow-up is more important as well. Asking them about their safety plan when they come and see you again. And I agree with that 100%. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay. One of the things that I really like to use, and this was taught to me by Jan Thornton, who is my mentor and she has been my professor. She's amazing. But she calls it the rule of five. And you have 5 fingers on each hand. So the first hand, you have 5 things that you can do for 5 minutes. Okay. So that's 25 minutes that you'll be doing something. So 5 things like I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to take my dog swimming. I'm going to run outside around my house 3 times. I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to do this. Five things that you can do for 5 minutes. Then on the other hand, you have 5 fingers. So 3 people that you can call and talk to for at least 5 minutes. Okay. So not only having those people, but having their phone numbers memorized in case you don't have your phone, because let's be honest, if we were to ask somebody, hey, what's your partner's phone? They probably wouldn't know their phone number nowadays because, we just put it into the cell phone. But 3 people that they can talk to with their phone numbers. Then this one, the ring finger on the left hand is things that you've learned in therapy, breathing techniques, okay, counting to 10, whatever it is that helps you ground that you have learned in therapy or therapeutic interventions. And then the last one is calling 988. Calling 988 or calling the professionals. If it's an emergency, call 911, which it's totally fine to call 911 as well. They will come to your house. They will send the appropriate people. Okay. So I'm glad that we were able to talk a little bit about, those safety plans and the things that you use sometimes on a daily basis. I was able to work in crisis work for about a year when I worked in public mental health, and it was interesting to see what the therapists would do. I was a case manager at that time, what the therapists would do to safety plans. Some of them were really good at it, and I'm not going to lie, some of them weren't that great at it. And it ended up being bad, and people ended up harming themselves because the safety plan was not as good as it could have been. Okay, because in reality, I believe that people were just checking off the boxes. Okay, whereas with a safety plan, it needs to be individualized to each person. Okay, so moving forward, we need to assess equals risk. Okay, this is one of the strongest areas of research that we have. Bob had access to a firearm, and because Bob had access to a firearm, the chance went up of him ending his life. Okay. That's what made that moment in his life immediately life-threatening because he had access. Okay. He had access to lethal means. Most suicidal crises are short-lived. That's why I really like the 5 things that you can do for 5 minutes each. That gives you 25 minutes to get your mind in a place where it might go down a little bit, or it might level you out just enough so that you can call 988 and talk to somebody like Courtney. Okay. If we can create time and distance, it can potentially save lives. And what's critical is most attempts are impulsive and short-lived. Yes, some attempts are thought out and planned, but most of them are impulsive. Okay, and they're very short-lived. If they could have waited for 5 more minutes, something could have happened that would have changed their mind. Okay, which means if the method is not immediately available, many people could survive that moment. I've talked to many individuals who have been suicidal in the past and have attempted in the past, and I've asked them, um, if you would have not had means, or if you would have not had something that was accessible, would have you been able to attempt? And they said, well, absolutely not. There's no way that I could have. Okay. And so if you are working with somebody that is suicidal, take away their access. I mean, obviously that's not your job to take away their access, but in your safety plan, say, okay, you have guns. Do you have a gun safe? Do you have a lock for that gun safe? Okay, that key, who can you give that key to? Or who can we call in to be a part of your safety plan so that you don't have access to the firearm? Okay. And, working with them, if there's somebody that says, I'm going to drive my car into oncoming traffic. Okay, well, maybe it's probably a good idea if they don't drive while they're feeling this way. And so maybe have them call somebody to come and pick them up from your office after you've safety planned. Okay. But access equals risk. And so if we take away that access to lethal means, the risk is going to go down. Kaylee, we involve family, spouse. I love that. Okay, I love that. Involving other people, not necessarily to put more stress on them as a group. Sorry, I'm going to reword that because that was a whole lot of jumbled words. Involving family and spouse helps because it takes all of the weight off of that individual that is struggling. Okay, so I've only got a couple more minutes, so we'll go through the rest of them pretty quickly. So what reduces risk? Okay, brief interventions before discharge. Okay, it's not just necessarily the intensity of treatment, but really what is the most important thing that helps reduce suicide risk is connection. Okay, I think that's the thing that we need to recognize the most, that connection. I've worked with substance use for a very long time now, and they've been telling me from the get-go that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I agree with that, but I also agree that the opposite of feeling low and feeling sad is connection as well. Whether it's connection to you at that moment, obviously not dual relationships or anything like that, because that's unethical, right? But recognizing that having that connection in that moment with that individual and providing hope. Perfect. Denny, I love that. Providing hope. Okay. So a brief intervention, go in, assess, screen, do all that stuff, make a safety plan. Okay. And then a structured follow-up. Okay. A structured follow-up looks like what? Put it in the chat. What do you think a structured follow-up looks like? The two greatest risk factors for someone having the capacity to die by suicide is not feeling like they belong or understood. Reassessment and review of the existing plan. Okay. Time of next appointment. Good. Good. All of those are great. Appointment within 1 week in person. Yes. So structured follow-up, a lot of times it is recommended that you should follow up within 24 to 48 hours to talk to them, to check in on them, to make sure that they are doing okay, to ask them if they have any questions, to see if they need another session before the next week. But check in via phone before the next appointment is a great option. Then after 1 week, you should check in on them again after 1 week. Okay. Not only a check-in, but an in-person evaluation, an in-person therapy treatment. Okay. A follow-up phone call by the mobile crisis team or by yourself. I agree with that 100%. Okay. And then ongoing contact. We do the 24 to 48 hours, then we do the week. And then after a month, you can reassess. You can reassess and see how they're doing, screen for suicidal ideation, and then continue treatment going forward. But I want you to remember that connection is one of the key factors in helping with suicide risk and reducing suicide risk. The highest risk is after they leave. Between 24 to 48 hours, you should have that first contact. I already talked about this. 1 week, another check-in in person. A month, reassess the suicidal ideation. And 3 to 6 months, continued contact and therapy interventions. Okay. What is it that we're still getting wrong, though? What is it that we're still missing? Sometimes when they say they're fine, right? A lot of people are good at saying they're fine, but they're really not fine. Thinking to yourself, well, I didn't want to make it worse by asking if they're going to end their life by suicide. thinking, oh, well, they've never attempted before, then that's a good sign, right? That's strong that they won't attempt. And then I trusted my gut. Those are still some of the things that we're getting wrong. Okay, now I'm not saying that we're doing anything bad, because we're not. We're really not doing anything bad. We're working in a place where it's difficult. It's difficult to talk to people. It's difficult to understand what people are going through. And so direct questioning is what is needed. Okay. Um, if you didn't learn anything today, because obviously we've talked about this many times, and throughout your careers, I'm sure I mean, we have to get continuing education every year, and a lot of that, or some of it, is suicide, right? If you haven't learned anything today, I want you to remember this: screen consistently. Okay, if they make a comment, ask questions. Stop outdated practices. Okay, become knowledgeable of the NASW in 2026, what they want from us. Okay, use collaborative safety planning. Talk about those different types that we've used. Help them get in a different mindset, and then follow up after you discharge them. Okay, because that's what we're here for. Okay, when I think of Bob, when I think of the people that I've experienced and had experiences with suicide, these are some of the things that I've thought to myself, this is what I would do now. Not necessarily this is what I would do different, but this is what I would do now. I would screen, I would stop the outdated practices, I would safety plan with them, and I will follow up after discharge. Okay. So, in closing, I just want to say this will happen in your practice. This will happen in your career. You will work with somebody that is at risk, probably this year. The question isn't if, it's whether you catch it in time. And so ask questions, be direct. Okay. Talk about those things that you need to talk about. Okay. So here are some of the resources that I used. You're all awesome. Thank you for being here. I apologize. I think I went 2 minutes over, Aaron. I apologize. If anybody needs anything, you can find my contact information on the USU website, or I can put it in here.